Okay. I think we've started.
Okay. Welcome. Before we start the program, we'd like to share a couple of housekeeping items. Please note that the live webinar is open to the public. The webinar replay is available only to ABA members. The audience has joined this webinar in listen-only mode. You can submit text questions through the question and answer portal. You may send in questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address as many as we can during the question and answer session at the end of today's webinar. Hi, my name is Brittany Thomas Faith. I am an immigration attorney out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the co-chair of the ABA YLD Immigration and Naturalization Committee. This program is brought to you by that committee and is titled E-2 Treaty Investors from Screening Clients to Filing the Case. Joining me today is my lovely co-chair, Sarah Bernay, who runs the law office of Sarah Bernay in Los Angeles, California, Estelle Bernabon, I'm sorry, who runs her firm out of Miami, Florida, and John Khosravi, I'm sorry, I should have practiced these before, who runs the JQK law firm in Los Angeles, California.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Hi, Brittany.
Hi.
Okay. So this is us. And so thanks so much for joining us. This is a program that is going to address some basic information regarding E-2s as well as some tips. The goal is to have a free conversation where we may not repeat the exact same information that you're reading everywhere. It's not a CLE. The idea is to give you at least the basics of an option for your clients that is an option that is often overlooked, but that can be a really, really good solution for people that qualify. So some people could, think that they have no ways of moving to America, but when screening them, you may realize that an E-2 might be a good option. So why is an E-2 such a good option? It's an affordable investment option. It's renewable without time limits. The spouse is eligible to work, and the children under 21 can join. And you can have a joint venture. Multiple investors are allowed in this kind of setup. So I'm going to ask John here, who are his usual clients for E-2s? And I think we're going to see that John's clients and Estelle's clients, for instance, might be different. So we all get investors that are, that have a different background, but at the end we can still, offer the E-2 option. So that's also something that is very, very interesting. So John, tell us about why your clients might be interested in an E-2.
Yeah, many times my clients are people on an F1 student visa and want to start their own business. And the OPT time really allows them to get it started and gives a test time for them to see if it works or not. And so their self-employment for your own company is permitted on the OPT. So they start out there, they test the waters, they see if it's something they can do. And once it seems kind of solid or it's going somewhere, then we start doing the E-2 paperwork in preparation for a change of status. And so a lot of times they're students, not as sophisticated business-wise, but they have financial backing a lot of time from their family. This can be a positive or negative. Some are more go-getters and they do it. And some are kind of just using their parents' money just to stay in the U.S. a little longer. So it's a mixed bag, but that's frequently the type of E-2 client that I get.
Yeah. What about you, Estelle? Who are your usual clients?
We have very different profiles. So some of them are employees, like they've been employed all their lives and now they just want, to go on their own, to be entrepreneurs. So they decide to open their own business in the US or purchase an existing business in the US. I also have clients that have been entrepreneurs all their lives and they want to come. And I also have very large corporations who want to transfer their employees to the US, either existing employees. So we have also the option of the L1, but we are not going to go there today.
Not today.
And we have, but most of my clients are from France, and until November, the treaty with France, like the E-2, was for 5 years. So the E-2 was a great opportunity for people to start their business and for companies to send employees in the US. And so that basically it, employees, entrepreneur, or corporations.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting to see that this is something that we can offer to somebody who's been an employee for all of their life, someone who just graduated from university, a large corporation, some banks are sending people on E1s or E2s. I mean, it's just very interesting to see that it's an option that is very broad in terms of the target demographics. So I think that's just for people to really understand when we're talking about E2s, there are some basic eligibility key points, and those are things that you would usually read everywhere, but I think it's important to address them so everybody actually understands. For an E2, you have to meet a nationality test, so there has to be a treaty that allows for an E2, and you can click on the link that we provided and you will see if the country is on the list. And then if you have a national of, for instance, France who's on the list, then you know that it's potentially an option. Then you always have to screen for an admissibility and removability, and that's something that is very important because some people don't do it, and you can have the best case possible, but if people are not admissible to the US, you're going to have other issues, so always screen for that. And then something that is also important in your basic eligibility is the intent of the person. An E2 is a non-immigrant visa. People have to have an intent to depart. They have to have some ties at least to like their home country or abroad, and that's something that could be an issue later. I don't know if you guys agree with the ties issues.
I've seen if they want to deny the case, that's a tag along that to throw in there that they don't see intent to return. So it's usually just something I throw extra in there, but they can't always call it out, even though it kind of doesn't make sense for you to, because you're coming to run a business or own a business here.
Yeah. Usually only a statement of intent to depart is sufficient, but then it depends also on the embassy. So you have to check the consular post, because some consular posts, they're fine with a statement only, and others, they want to see that you actually keep ties in your home country. So I guess the best is to check the instructions and also try to gather information about the post.
Right. So one thing that,
go ahead.
So circling back to something Estelle said, which I think also works with this, is, Estelle goes, oh, until November of last year, it was 5 years for France. How do you determine the length that someone can come in on an E2, and how do you determine the consular specific instructions?
To me? So
anyone.
Yeah, so you go to, first of all, to determine the eligibility to the E, you check if there is a treaty between the US and this specific country. So you go to the link that is provided in the PowerPoint presentation, and on this link, actually, you click on the country, you click on E to know exactly this type of visa, and then it says the duration of the visa for this specific country. So, for example, for France, it's 25 months. For Switzerland, it's 4 years. For the UK, it's 5 years, but there is a residency requirement before you can apply. So depending on the country, there are different durations. And then for the instructions based on the consular post, you just go usually on their website. And if they don't have instruction, you can email them. Or if they sometimes don't answer on point, sometimes they just disregard your email, then you try to contact colleagues or try to get your network working,
Yeah, and that's something that is also important when you screen people, is obviously the duration of the visa is going to have an impact on people's interest. But one thing to realize is the duration of your visa is one thing, but when you are admitted into the US as an E2, you automatically get usually 24 months, unless maybe you're passport expires before, or like, you know, exceptions. But so that's something also that is different. You have the reciprocity table for the visa length, but then you get admitted usually for 2 years. So that's something that is important. Now we're going to move on to screening for advanced eligibility. So we talked about the, you know, the basics, but we're going to talk about the fact that we have to have a specific makeup of the ownership of the business, and that has links to the nationality. So I don't know, John, would you like to explain this, how you would explain it to your clients usually?
With regards to nationality of, yeah, the ownership has to be kind of like an L1 ownership and control kind of situation by the foreign national of that country. So it could be 50% and negative ownership, which is an interesting thing, as long as you call the shots. You got to be careful with USCIS. I've seen them sometimes not understand negative control, even though it's in the Foreign Affairs Manual, which is your guidebook for the E-2. But you could have multiple people from like Australia, for example, each owning 25%, as long as the majority is owned by owners of that country. But if someone's a green card holder, they lose that ability, even though they're nationals of that country. So you got to be careful how this ownership breakdown occurs. Be very sensitive to it, especially if there's mergers, acquisition, sales of share ownership.
Yeah, and that's, so basically you need 50% ownership in one country. So it could be 100 investors, as long as like they own 50% and they're all, like, for instance, French, and they're not green card holders, and they're not dual US citizens, then you would have an entity that is eligible for an E-2. So that's something very important, is to always remember the 50% with the test where you have control over the company, even if it's a negative control. In terms of marginality and business plan, it's very important to realize that it's not just about a big investment, it's also about the plans to grow a company where you can have employees. So Estelle, when you have clients, how do you explain marginality, and how do you screen that a business is suitable for an E-2?
So I always tell them there are no minimum investment, but you have to think about how much you need to spend to set up your business. So for example, if you decide to sell services or to operate a website, you know, like website creation company, your investment is going to be much less than if you decide to sell some, I don't know, boats, you know, like, so that's the example I usually give them. So you need to invest accordingly, but the investment is not the only thing. For example, I've heard about cases where, for example, some people spend a lot of money, like over 500,000, and they get their visa denied, because in the end, they are not going to, the business model cannot create any employment. So then you have an issue with marginality. So even if your investment is low, it's fine as long as the business will create employment. For example, it was like about a year and a half ago, I had a client, it was the lowest investment I did, and I sweated it, you know, like I was worried for the client. And he put into the company $20,000 and spent only $9,000 in his premises just to run the business. And it was approved, actually. So we had a very strong business plan where we showed that he was really going to recruit. Everything was set up. He had some prospective clients. He had some, like a team of employees that was ready to work for him. So I guess it was pretty convincing for the officer that the issue of marginality was not there, even though the investment was very low.
Was it a USCIS case or CB? USCIS. So we'll talk about this. I'll make a note to circle back on the pros and cons of USCIS versus consular processing, so we can talk about the differences.
What kind of business was that? That was with that investment amount?
It was a software company for to help condominium management company to run, you know, the condominiums associations. So it was a niche, it was very specific, and it was hard because in the end, you know, like there are huge companies that operate this type of softwares, and is new in the market, and you have to go to condominium to convince them to use your software. So it was like I was very worried about it, and that's why actually I didn't send him to a consular post, because I didn't want him to leave the country.
Yeah. And so when we talk about minimum investment, I think what we get is with USCIS, we may have a very low minimum investment. For instance, myself, I wouldn't send anybody to a consulate with less than 120,000. Do you guys have like an idea or just like a threshold that you wouldn't present a case under?
Not really.
Not for me. It really depends on the business plan and how believable it is, how much of a sales pitch that person could do, kind of like a Shark Tank kind of thing. Is this person going to go talk to an officer, be able to handle it, or are they going to fold under the pressure? And so it's really about perception, how the business plan looks, how creative it looks. It's a sales job most than anything. One quick question someone asked, I want to pass through it. They asked if there was a company that had 4 owners from like Australia, how do we do direct and develop for each investor? We talk about how do each of them get an E-2 and showing they're developing investing. In the situations I've had, only one of those investors wanted the E-2, the rest just were making money off it. I would imagine your business plan would specify duties for each person. In that kind of situation, we have 4 investors. It should be a bigger project that requires more kind of people. That's just my perspective. But if you all have a different idea about that.
You can also have people as employees. You don't have to have everybody as an investor. That might also make more sense. You could have someone in development, someone technical, someone, I don't know, in operation. That's something I think that would be the idea. In terms of this kind of setup, and that's a good segue for our next topic, is the source of funds. When you have many investors, you usually are pulling funds from, many bank accounts, and that's something that can always like be a little bit more difficult. It's not that it can't be done, but the sources of funds is usually a really important eligibility question, where the funds come from. I know that some people are more daring than I am. I like the funds to be, basically earned and non-contingent upon anything, and just personal funds, but there are some ways to for instance, have a loan in some circumstances. I know that Estelle, we've talked about this in the past together, and you have experience with money that was a loan as the source of the investment. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about this? Because a lot of people are very interested in using funds from a loan.
Yeah. So I've done like investment with loans and also gifts. So gift is pretty easy. You just check, the regulation in the country where the gift was made to make sure you have all the paperwork in order, and usually it's pretty easy. But for the loan, I always tell them it needs to be secured by the investor's personal assets. I'm sorry. You don't need to specify the assets that secure the loan. So you don't have to say, for example, a property located at this address that is valued that much, but you need to have like a promissory note basically between the two. And I always include that in the file. And I also have the client bring the original promissory note at the time of the interview with the trail of funds. Like we need to show that the funds were debited from the donor, then credited on the investor's account. And usually I try to avoid the donor or like the lender to send the money directly to the company. I've done it, it was fine, it was approved, it didn't cause any issues, but still I try to tell the clients it's best if the money could go straight to your personal account, and then you have control over the money and how you want to use it, and to spend it. So that's always better.
Yeah,
I've got a question.
The main thing is personal guarantee, and it doesn't go on the assets of the E-2 business. You don't want a loan based on those assets. That's a really harsh one.
Yeah.
Sorry, Vinny.
Christine, you wanted to say something?
There was just a question on the chat. So a person with 25% ownership can get an E-2 so long as they have the majority ownership from the trading company.
As an employee. That's what I do, like as an employee, because the person doesn't have control over the company. So then you have to do it either as an executive, a manager, or a specialist. And then, yes, this person will have an E-2.
I think that technically if you have control, you can go in as well with just 25% ownership as an investor. It may just not make any sense. It may be just not necessary.
Yeah, I just find it really hard to prove that if you only own 25%, that you somehow have 51% of the power. And maybe it's that, you know, you're the dad and the other 75% is owned by your kids, and then you can be like, I'm really in charge. But that is something that I would see if I was a consular officer. I would have a lot of questions about if they only had 25% ownership, but they claim that they had majority control.
Yeah.
You can just easily say they're an executive and they're a president of the company if that's that. So.
Yeah, but it just may be unnecessarily difficult. I mean, the end goal is just to get an E-2. It doesn't really matter if you're an employee or if you're the investor. I mean, that's how I see it. I don't know if you guys agree.
No, I agree.
Yeah, so in terms of eligibility, it's not written anywhere, but the business experience, in a way, well, it is kind of written in the FAM, but we have someone who has to be able to, you know, direct and develop their investment in the US. So for instance, John, it's interesting, you have a lot of younger investor. How do you go about their business experience? How do you see if they're going to be a good pitcher at the consulate? Because the consulate is really your first investor. You have to pass the test there. So how do you get it? Like, who do you know is going to be well suited for this?
Yeah, usually because there are F1 students here, their degree is related to the kind of work that they're going to be doing. So that does a lot. When there's a master's degree or some sort of M1, a vocational degree in that field that they got, that helps a lot. And then sometimes if they just have experience, like I had a guy who got an M1 for, he was going to make a music studio. But before that, he was a DJ that did, you know, some DJing in Ibiza, this and that. So we just threw it in there. So this guy knows music, knows sound equipment. He's done some songs with some people. He wasn't even that successful or famous. But the embassy, he didn't invest that much either. The embassy just gave it to him really quickly. I was kind of surprised. He wasn't the most competent person to sell well, but he had a vocational degree in this and he'd done tours and stuff like that. So they believed him. Yeah.
Okay. And do you guys have like an age cutoff, like where you will not present any to? I know that, for instance, recently I was contacted by a guy who is honestly very qualified, but he's, I guess, 19 or 20. And I think he would be a wonderful O1. I wouldn't present him as an E-2 because I'm just worried that, you know, the consulate would just deny him on the spot as a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old. Do you guys have a cutoff?
I mean, it just depends how sophisticated they come off. Yeah, go ahead, Estelle.
No, sorry. I just want them. I look at their resume and I try to talk a lot with them to see if they did, you know, like some charity work or anything. You know, sometimes they are president of some association during their education or academic curriculum. And so I try to talk a lot with them and we try to pull out, you know, like relevant information that could be in the resume. Or when they are very young, and I think the youngest I did, I don't remember if it was 21 or 22, but like pretty young, no real experience or anything. And in such cases, I tell them to maybe to partner with someone that has the experience. The partner doesn't need to have a lot of ownership in the company, but would be just supportive, you know, like for financial decisions or for credibility with the staff, things like that. But and usually it goes well because then at the embassy, usually this profile of investors, when they are very young and they want to go on their own, they are pretty quick, you know, like they know how to sell themselves. Somebody that is shy or doesn't have like,
very good.
Yeah.
No,
They entrepreneur. So they are
Let's see. You want to go to the next slide and talk about, you know, kind of the red flags?
Yeah, so I think it's important to spot weak cases. That's something that really can affect the practice of an immigration lawyer. And if you don't really realize that a case is going to be weak, it can be extremely difficult to take somebody to the end. So for instance, my big pet peeve is what I call Band-Aid E-2s, which is that you don't have any ways of staying in the US and you just kind of throw in money and you hope to get an E-2. And people in that kind of settings don't really want to spend money. So you're kind of always like fighting with them because it's counterintuitive for them to like spend their money to get the E-2. They don't want to spend money, they just want to stay. So so I called it like kind of like a Band-Aid E-2. So I don't know if like you guys have experience with people that just wanted to stay here and just threw money at the problem and we're getting an E-2.
Yeah, try to avoid those as well because they don't get the paperwork to you that you need. They keep putting stuff off. They're not really involved in it. And so you're constantly chasing them down. It seems like you care about the case more than they do. Whenever that happens, it's a recipe for disaster and frustration.
Yeah, like that. What about you, Estelle? Do you have people that contact you in that situation?
Yeah, but then I guess this during the consultation, you see your client's personality, but they see yours too. And they see, you know, like how thorough I could be and demanding I could be. So they know on their own usually that I'm not a good fit for them. And they just move on.
Brittany, does it happen to you?
I am a lovely person. I think that I try and I recognize that competition, that there's no such thing as competition when it comes to immigration lawyers, but it's more about finding a fit for your case. So I try and, you know, talk to them, you know, and show my personality as much as I can at the beginning, because there are some people that, you know, that Estelle would be a better fit for than me. And, you know, I think that we all have a lot of knowledge on this panel, but I think that each one of us brings our own personality to a case. And I think that you know, that's part of the consultation experience. I do have just a housekeeping note. Can everyone please put their questions in the question and answer section and not on the webinar chat? It's hard going and looking at two different spots.
Okay, cool. And I see some questions that are going to be great for later, so don't worry if we don't address them right now. They will be addressed at some point. And I think, so actually this one is good. Red flags for marginality. Well, that kind of goes with like the do-it-yourself business plan, the inexperienced investor. The idea is like you're going all in. You're really, you know, putting a lot of money on the table, but you're also getting the help you need. So like for instance, on marginality, someone that would show a business plan that is really weak with like, or just numbers that are not realistic, that would be a lot of red flags. One thing that I don't like is do-it-yourself business plans. It doesn't mean that people can't do a wonderful business plan, but I think for E-2 purposes, people are really playing with fire. What about you, Estelle? I see you're making faces.
I don't like do-it-yourself business plans, and usually I give them some contacts, and I explain why I want them to go with these contacts. And I tell them that in the end, they're going to lose a lot of time, a lot of money if they try to do it themselves or to use somebody outside of the list I provide them, because these professionals are used to the way I work and they know the type of templates I like. So it's we're saving time. And just to go back to the previous question that was really good about red flag on marginality, I think a tip could be to look at the size of the premises. For example, if you rent a restaurant, I'm going to go with the basic example. If you rent a restaurant and it's like, I don't know, like 200 square feet, then it's way too small. And especially if you apply as a couple, let's say you have one investor and one dependent spouse, the officer might very well think that one is going to be in the kitchen, the other one is going to be at the cashier and in the dining room, like kind of dining room, to serve people, and that's it. And you're not going to create employment. So I think a good tip for that could be also to look at the size of the premises.
Yeah, for sure. Always like the inventory as well. For instance, I had a young man who wanted to start a home staging company, and I was telling him, well, you have to have a certain like inventory that, you know, makes sense so you can actually make money with all of your inventory. He was like, well, I'm going to spend, you know, 60,000 or whatever, and that's going to be sufficient to go to the consulate. But what really makes sense is, do you have enough inventory to get things, you know, up and going and running with some employees? So that you're right, like when we're thinking of the business, we're not business consultants, but we have to kind of project and be like, well, is this doable with what you're really proposing? So that's very important. I think that's something that we also see in people that are inexperienced investors, or people that just have a very low investment, very kind of like withholding sometimes, spending enough money to really go all in and have a business that is not going to be marginal. So that's very important. I think that's where
we had a question on that. Is it possible now to run the business from the investor's home, since we're in a lot of places are locked down?
Yeah, I think right now that, you know, everybody, well, I don't know about everywhere in the US, but at least in Los Angeles, you have to be home. So I don't think it's an issue to work from home. I personally think it's very important to have business premises for an E-2. I mean, I think that going in and applying for an E-2 without some kind of a commercial lease, or at least like an office lease, is a very, very bad idea. I know that a lot of people will just let go of their office once they get their E-2. That's something I'm definitely not keen on. I don't know if, John, maybe do your younger clients go with like loft, like, you know, live and work kind of
they want to. I don't like it. We work in the kind of like, because you never know what the officer is that you're dealing with is going to review that. And so what I say, if they're trying to save money, go get into a bad area of town and get somewhere really cheap. And then once E-2 is approved, then break that lease, or then go to someone that's more expensive that you want to work for. But have a commercial lease, work from home. Some officers may say it's not a designated commercial area, it's not valid. There was a recent liaison meeting where I think the embassy said you don't have to have commercial premises necessarily, but I wouldn't rely on that. It's all officer specific, and it doesn't look, you know, they don't buy it that you work from home, and how you're going to bring employees there, all that kind of stuff. And you might not have zoning for doing a commercial operations at a home, even though people do it all the time. I'm in my home right now, but that's the reality of it. You really want to have that kind of location.
Yeah.
So Sasha Westerman also pointed out that USCIS needs to be able to conduct a site check, and a home office makes that very difficult.
Yeah, I think during COVID though, people would understand that you're at home, but I think, yes, that's very true. One big problem is sometimes a client don't want to be surrounded by the people that they really need for their E-2. If they'll just go to the immigration attorney thinking that we are everything they need. And I think that's something that, for instance, Estelle is really wonderful at, is like telling people, you know, this is what I'm doing and this is what the other people are going to be doing for you. That's a conversation that we've had on several occasions. So Estelle, do you pretty much, like, you know, when you're the first person that your client talks to and say, okay, I want to establish my business in America, do you give them a list of all the people that need to be involved, and how do you introduce that conversation?
So usually I explain the steps, and when I explain the steps, of course, there are a lot of other professionals that I talk about. I say, okay, you have to go to an accountant or a corporate attorney to get your company registered. And then if you want to purchase a business, you're going to have again, a business attorney involved, maybe an accounting firm to review and do the audit and stuff like that. So in the end, they understand that there are a lot of different people, and most of the time they tell me, can you handle the transaction yourself? And I'm like, no, I'm specialized only in business immigration. I don't do anything else. And because I've seen, and I guess it depends also on your clientele, but I've seen that when you start answering questions that are outside the scope of your outside your scope, basically, they start asking much more questions, like how do you find a school? How much does it cost to live in this city? Do you know how much the rent is going to cost me? The insurance, whatever. And then, no, I'm not their personal assistant, I'm their lawyer, and I want this distance between them and me. And now, you know, with the emails on the phone, you answer all the time and all of that. So already we are very close to our clients. So I want to keep a little distance still, as much as I can.
Do any of you ever write the business plan for your client?
Never.
Some people do, though, and I think for me, it's more of a liability issue. You know, sometimes some business plans are quite creative or very quite optimistic, and I wouldn't want to be in the, like, it's not my place to tell somebody be more optimistic if you want your, you know, if you want a shot. I think they have to figure out with whoever is helping them with their business plans how they can actually reach good projections by, you know, kind of working on their numbers and working on their projections, maybe working on their inventory, like you were saying, how big the restaurants can be. So that's something I wouldn't want to do, because I don't want to be liable for business advice. I don't know about you guys, if that's for the same reason or.
Yeah, and on top of that, I'm not an accountant. I don't know how to calculate depreciation, amortization, and all of that. This is not my job. Like, I review the business plan, I point out issues, and of course the clients get involved in the communication with the business plan company, but that's it. I just review, give comments, and that's it.
Yeah, no, I agree. So so basically, I think we all understand that if you're jumping into your first E-2, you're not going to be doing everything for your client. That's something that they have to understand from the get-go, as like welcoming and wonderful you want to be. You can't be everything, and you can't substitute yourself to the entrepreneur. So that's something very important. I think there's some very interesting specific strategies and tips that a lot of people don't know about. For instance, one thing that I use a lot, in order to optimize spending, is to prepay a lot of things. So for instance, we'll just go in and we'll prepay a year of lease, we'll prepay just as many things as we can to really reach a level of spending that is substantial. Do you guys do that as well? Yeah.
Prepaying the lease is a main thing. Pay 6 months ahead of time. That's a main investment kind of thing that bulks up the investment price. Then every little thing you can, or if they're donating equipment, or not donating, but just, you know, transferring personal equipment, we try to get valuations for that and put that in there as well. Every little thing you can counts.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of escrow accounts, that's something that some people may not know about. But for instance, when you purchase a business, you can add a clause that basically the purchase is contingent upon the issuance of the E-2 visa, and basically set aside the purchase amount to an escrow account. That's something that does count for investment purposes. For instance, Estelle, do you like to do this? Do you see this being, you know, a good idea for your clients? Is it easy to set up?
Yeah, it's easy to set up. It's good for the clients, because in the end it protects them too. But it's mostly, I would say, a discussion to have with the seller. Some sellers agree to do that, others don't. Most of the brokers won't offer this option because they don't want, you know, they want to get their commissions right away. But it's an option that you have to offer to your clients, and usually that's the one that they want to go with, but then it's really not up to you. The thing is that in such cases, I always recommend having the full purchase amount deposited into the escrow account of the business attorney.
Yeah, for sure. And that can also be something that is also helping. For instance, if you're unable to open a bank account in America, that can really show that, you know, all the money is in America, it's been invested. So that's something that is that I really like. We were previously talking about loans and gifts as investments. We've said that it is possible. Gifts, I've done a ton. Loans, I definitely am more worried about loans because I'm just seeing this being you know, a little scary. So I've actually always tried to stay away unless it was a loan from a bank based on a property asset. But I know you guys have done it, so clearly that's a specific strategy and a good tip to have and to keep in mind. I like to show that we're right away hiring American.
Can I mention something about the gifts?
Yeah.
I would just also, if the gift has not been transferred, so like a lot of times they get, you know, gifts from relatives, you know, especially if you're doing a change of status, USCIS will RFE for source of funds on the gift. And so you need to make it clear to the person who's giving the gift that they're going to have to disclose all of their source of funds as well on the gift. And that can deter some people from wanting to give that gift. You know, most of the time this is with family members and they understand that, you know, like dad is transferring money to kids so that they can stay in the United States. But if it's, you know, a prior business partner or someone they're going to, you know, be doing business with in the future or something like that, a lot of people might be more hesitant to, you know, be willing to turn over those financial documents.
For sure, for sure.
The loan isn't from a bank. I also do source of funds for loans as well, just to be safe, because the source of funds pops up at the worst possible time.
Yeah, I actually always fully document the sources of funds as far as I can go, because I don't know, I just expect that question, and so I think it's good to be fully prepared and not have to worry last minute or scramble. I like to show that we're going to hire U.S. citizens or green card holders right away, if possible. Do you guys also tell your clients to show a good faith efforts that at least they're trying to hire American right off the bat?
Yeah, if they have any person that they're already planning on hiring, I include the resume of the U.S. citizen or legal permanent worker. I, you know, describe what they're going to be doing. You know, if they've already identified anybody in the U.S. that they want to work for, like they want to work for them, then I include all of that.
I also do independent contractors or companies in America they're working with. So they have some sort of agreement, some sort of breakdown of what's going to happen or who the independent contractors are. I include that in there just to bulk it up. Right.
For sure. And one thing that we always have to tell a client is the business has to be, you know, nearly operational or operational. Is this something that you have specific tips about to kind of like tell people, well, this is how you can speed up the process, or this is really what you need to be showing? I know that usually when I present an E-2, people are either about to open or already in operation. What are your specific strategies for this?
Yeah, I always want them to be ready. Just pluck you in and get it started. Even because they say near operational is okay, but I don't want to risk it. You just have to have everything in order, and you end up losing money that way because you have a business that's just sitting there. But that's the cost of an E-2. It's not very business wise, the E-2 system, the way they've developed it. It's a lot of loss that happens for no reason.
So how do you balance the investor's desire to not spend too much before getting the visa? You just tell them that tough luck?
Yeah, so it's a loss leader, yeah.
Or sometimes what I do is they compensate with the operational part. You know, you show that they didn't spend too much, but still it was enough to get ready and to start getting revenues, being able to employ people, to sign contracts with professionals or, you know, service providers. So you try to balance. And same thing with the recruitment or showing that the company is operational. I think you have to use your own judgment. Is it like if you have a restaurant, a huge restaurant that is basically on the street or on a street where there is a lot of traffic, then you may not need to go as far as someone that operates a website company at the top of a building. You know, nobody knows that this company is up there. So, you know, like, you have to assess.
Stage. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. And I think for restaurants, my restaurants are never in operation when I usually send them. They're all like nearly operational. They're all like waiting for one thing at least to be fully ready to go. And we've never had an issue. But like you said, it really depends. Like if you can gauge that this is really going to be a real business and you have done so many steps to be near operational, then the consulate might see that you're serious. In terms of professional qualifications for the investors or the employee, I think that's also something very important to understand is you have to have a client who's going to present well, who's going to be able to talk about what we're going to be doing, what the company is about. So for instance, someone that doesn't speak any English, that is quite weak, quite timid, you're pretty much going to have to get them ready. And that also means sometimes you're going to have the difficult conversation of maybe you need to take English classes, maybe you need to take a professional course in this new little niche market that you want to be doing in the US. Do you guys tell clearly like your clients, hey, get ready because we need you to be, you know, we need you to look serious and yeah.
Well, we have about 4 more slides to get through in 12 minutes plus questions. So let's move on. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, and I think some questions are not though for this, but for this webinar, because EB1 questions we're not going to be able to get to. Okay, so CONSULAR versus USCIS. Eligibility, pro cons. I think if we go really quick, we know that USCIS might not require as much of a high investment. I think that's a big pro. Also, you know, someone who's in status here and you need to, you know, change their status quite quickly, that's something that is doable with USCIS. Cons, the second you leave, then you have to go to the consulate and redo the whole thing. You know, a brand new E-2, and then you have no guarantee that your E-2 is going to be approved at the consular level. The investor is not in the US anymore, can't run the business. So that's a little, you know, it's always like a little bit of an issue, but however, you could still, you know, consular process afterwards show that the company is doing well, that you're making money, that you have employees, all of this, and that actually 20K was sufficient. In terms of like,
I would also say a con is that you know you're going to get an RFE and your client's not going to get their Shark Tank moment. Like if your client is a good salesperson, you know they're going to do really well at their consular interview, then, you know, the consular interview would be great for them. But if they're, you know, but in the USCIS process, you just submit documents. And USCIS is almost guaranteed to give you a request for evidence for additional documents, no matter what you send.
You know, I don't know. My experience is that I haven't gotten that much RFE with E2s with USCIS, which is so weird. But it may work also for a client who's like, who doesn't present that well, yeah. You know, because we're not going to have to talk. So boom, like this is just all paperwork. And so I think that's something to consider. In terms of consular processing, I know that we've gotten a lot of questions regarding post-specific requirements. One thing that is very important is before you submit anything to a specific post, either it's like the main jurisdiction of the person, or if you want to go somewhere else, you actually have to clear it with the post, which I mean works in many cases. For instance, Canada is a post that is quite friendly to third country nationals. But one thing that is very important is each post usually has some kind of direction of what we're expecting in the E2. Not all posts are requesting the same thing. Some posts have like, we just have like the way we want the tabs, the number of pages. It's kind of interesting. So that's something people have to keep in mind is you can't just go and throw like the same file to every single post.
And they choose too, so always visit the website to see the most up-to-date version they want it delivered at that time.
Yeah, but most posts will put very directions, some don't, a few don't. And one thing that we also got as a question is if we could talk about minimum amount of investment per post. One thing you have to be careful is like no forum shopping. And then, you know, it's not so much the minimum investment is how well is this business going to be doing? So the marginality and also the fact that the investment is substantial. And if this is not post specific, it's really just something that needs to happen everywhere. Of course, for instance, London is known to be maybe a little bit more strict on the amount of investment, but I wouldn't just go and forum shop. I think it's a really bad idea. What about you guys?
Oh, I don't like forum shopping. Usually I send them wherever they live or their country of nationality, and I don't like even to send them to Canada or anything, because after I'm always worried that, you know, like in Canada, the officer is like, okay, why did you come to us? Are you prevented from going back to your home country? Did you maybe you didn't pay your taxes over there and you can't enter your country anymore? You know, like, let's go back wherever you live, go visit your family at the same time, and it's better for them.
Yeah. So
I
now
had a question about Venezuela. My understanding is that Venezuela is not a treaty country, so they would not, they wouldn't be able to get an E-2 in the first place.
well,
But a lot of Venezuelans, they have the Italian nationality. And so that's why I guess there are a lot of questions about that.
yeah.
One note on that, a lot of Brazilians have dual nationality with European countries as well. You can process your E-2 in Brazil, even though Brazil itself doesn't have an E-2 treaty. And you can email the consulate and ask for their list. I've done that in the past. They just send you an email breakdown how they want it.
Yeah. I find a lot of Venezuelans go to Costa Rica for their consular processing too.
I haven't done it.
Yeah.
There's a legitimate reason you could do it, but forum shopping itself causes suspicion. There's got to be a real legitimate reason why you, like if you might have someone's a dual national China, if they go to China, they're travel banned. So they want to go to Canada to avoid getting, you know, the coronavirus travel ban from going to China or something like that.
Well, years ago, Barbados had a lot of issues about that, because they would admit, like, they would take a lot of E-2s from French people living in France. And while Barbados didn't have jurisdiction over that, so they got investigated and some consular officers were fired apparently, so it was a big mess. So since then, you know, like, I think it's best to have your clients go wherever they should be going, because in the end, if your case get denied, the client might go get a consultation with another attorney who's going to say, but why did this attorney send you to this consular post? And then they're going to blame it on you. So best to go by the rules. You know, you have a post that has jurisdiction over you, go with this post.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's move on to the next slide. We have 5 minutes left and so many good questions. So
yeah, and maybe we'll go 5 minutes over. Would that be okay, Brittany, if we get 5 minutes extra?
no, 5 minutes extra. I'm the taskmaster here. So the role of the immigration attorney, I think Estelle's already covered pretty well. You know, on cultural difference, I think that, you know, like Estelle said, like most of her clients are French. And I think that, you know, we all have our own mix, and a lot of that depends on where our offices are. How do you guys deal with cultural differences?
It's a general immigration attorney thing of being able to adjust. It's mostly like personality issues, how well people are getting paperwork together. That's the biggest problem. Could you give me this document? Are you organized or not? It's more of a personality thing.
Yeah, I think it also sometimes, like, for instance, I'm French as well, and, you know, people will feel that connection, and it's not clear if you're the attorney or their friend, and then they'll just go in and kind of expect certain things. I think that also goes to the next key point is flat versus hourly. A lot of us work on flat fees. It's not an all-you-can-eat buffet, and that's something that is hard for people to grasp. Is a flat fee is what's reasonable within the representation, not everything you can think of, and the questions that you are just kind of like thinking out loud. It has to be that those are legitimate questions that you have to ask your attorney, not something that you may need. I don't know if you guys have that issue.
We offer hourly for our E-2s because we have 27 attorneys and we have a CPA on staff. So I can go to our business, our transactional attorneys and say, hey, can you do this business formation for me? And that's just charged hourly. And then if there's accounting issues, you know, a lot of times people have their own accountants, but we can have our CPA look at it and they bill for their hourly rate. But it does make me nervous anytime that someone goes to their consular interview and they haven't paid in full by the time of their consular interview, because I'm worried that if they got denied, that they're, you know, in another country and they're not happy that they got denied, and then I don't know if I'll ever get my full payment. So yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's really smart actually for E2s. Very few people do hourly for E2s, but that's something that we you know, have we deal with very often, is like a change of plans or just change of circumstances. Right now, COVID. I mean, for instance, I'm not billing any like change of circumstances with COVID, and I'm losing out a bunch of money. The change of plans for E2s are pretty much the norm. People go in, they want to do like a spaghetti shop, and then they want to open like a scooter rental thing. I mean, and all these things can happen within like a month, and the client comes back with like 50 different business ideas, and that's something unfortunately doesn't work. But Estelle has a really good idea. She puts a 3 business model, like basic review for immigration, as part of her retainer, and then the rest is hourly fees. So if someone is getting into E2s, I would definitely recommend maybe doing something hybrid, or at least very clearly state that this is not, you know, an all-you-can-eat buffet. It's just, you know, reasonable within the.
Well, you were talking about change of circumstances with COVID. We've gotten a lot of questions on that. What is going on to maintain status and changing business plans, and what are you guys seeing on that?
I mean, a lot of people are working from home. I see no issues with it. I mean, at the moment, because they're just complying with the law. I see some people that have closed shop, and I don't really see a huge issue. I mean, if you're the investor, you're probably still working. It's not because you're not, you know, operating that you're not working. You're probably still sourcing, doing some marketing, maybe switching to like a somewhat of an online model. For employees, I think that's a totally different issue. For instance, Estelle, do you have a lot of employees that have been, you know, furloughed recently? And what is your usual?
No, I don't have that much. Most of them, they are still employed. And but what I would recommend for E2 that want to renew their visas is, for now, if you can, and you can have them stay on their I-94s, try to keep them that way as long as you can, because you're going to show at the time of the renewal that before COVID, the company was doing good, having employees, revenues, whatever. During COVID, of course, everything went south. But then after, you have to show the after COVID that they can make it back up. So try to keep them as long as you can on the I-94 to be able to give some reassurance, you know, to the officer.
Yeah. So that's something, the next slide is something we're going to touch really quickly on. It's preparing the case. Obviously, you always want the best evidence possible that makes sense, but definitely ask your client to provide everything, and then you pick the best evidence, maybe a recap of the bank statements or whatever makes sense in your restricted amount of pages. You always have to be mindful of the time frame for the clients. Don't ever give like a super definitive time frames, because clearly time frames can change. And if there's any changes within the time frame of the filing, make sure that your client tells you and that you're fully prepared for the interview. In terms of preparing the client for the interview, that's something I take super seriously. People are grilled, and they pretty much, by the end of the prep, they know things by heart. Because some of my clients are not super fluent in English. Do you guys have a specific strategy for preparing clients?
You know, we're working so deeply with each other during the process that they kind of got the heads up for it, and I grill them, and I'm tough on them to make sure this is a serious thing, and not just, you know, it's not easy just because they spent some money. It's not a guarantee. So through the process, I'm constantly pushing them to make sure they have the answers needed.
Yeah. And do you tell them that, you said that you tell them it's serious, and I'm personally very tough on them, and that's tough love because I really care. I tell them that, you know, it's also serious because, for instance, people that are that have the ESTA privilege, would they be denied of their E2? They would lose their ESTA privilege. Do you guys warn them, or is this something that is just a stress factor and that is detrimental to their prep?
From day one of the consultation, like at the time of the consultation, they know exactly the risks, and especially, you know, when you feel that they are weak. The type of cases you talked about earlier, where they just want to buy themselves an E2 and they don't really want to operate a business, that's when I would say I try to scare them a little for them to understand the consequences.
Yeah. So that's very important. Don't just jump into an E2 if you're new at E2s, because this can actually really hurt people, hurt your clients if you're not, you know, if you're not proficient and can't really spot issues. Very quickly, major issues for renewal. We've talked about it, marginality, especially in the time of COVID. I'm personally not extremely worried. Like Estelle, like as long as you can show some progression, show that, you know, you've made it before and that you're going to grow again. I think that's something, you know, it's like a good faith effort at least, and I don't think that we're going to deny because people have struggled a little bit. Unauthorized employment is a big issue, especially for restaurants, for them to hire people that are not authorized to work. That's something I'm very strict about. Do you guys also warn your clients, do not, you know, do not hire someone who's not authorized to work in the US? Yeah.
Sure. My bigger worry is that they, you know, they're not making enough and they moonlight as an Uber driver or something like that. I've seen stuff like that pop up, and yeah, so you can't do that. You just work at specifically what's permitted.
Right. Yeah. I was more thinking of, you know, the investor hiring someone who's not authorized. But you're right. I mean, that's a very big risk as someone that's a major deviation from their business plan. Actually, I have clients that kind of will change their business. I've so far been quite lucky with people that have, you know, been able to successfully change their business plans. How do you feel about bringing in someone from renewal who's totally deviated from their business plan? Maybe Estelle.
Warning, warning, warning. Because in the end, you don't know how it's going to end up. The regulation says that you shouldn't be changing your business activity without an authorization, you know, from USCIS or a new visa application with the embassy. But things happen, and then I warn them and I tell them that we don't know, you know, like, and I always try when we can to link the previous business with the new business, explain how they went from that business to this other business, and disclose it in the file, in the cover letter, and try to explain it, and again prepare the client for the interview. But at the end, you don't know how it's going to end up. It really depends on the officer and how strict he's going to be, he or she's going to be.
Yeah, I think that's where we go with like a deviation. It might be that someone just pivoted, you know, to like something that was more of a market fit, right? Rather than like, you know, violated the terms of the visa. I think that's really how you package it usually, but sometimes you really can't. But the idea is like it was not the best market fit, and it's very normal for a business to kind of have changes and adapt to the market. I think we're ready for the Q&A. Hopefully we have the time to address most of them.
And I've been going through and typing answers to the ones that are kind of like easier and whatnot. So Q&A, and I'm only looking at questions in the question and answer box. So if you're putting anything in the chat, I'm not looking. Clients always ask if I can find a company. Oh, so it's, you know, what type of company do you prefer? I don't typically tell people what kind of company they should choose. What I do is I tell them that they need to speak with a business attorney. Typically I say someone in my office, and that, you know, they need to pick a business organization that works, you know, for the type of business it is, because USCIS is looking for them to have an actual business, but that I also remind them of the considerations about control of the company and things like that.
I would be a corporation of some sort, not a sole proprietorship, just to keep things separate, but that's a business attorney who could guide them on that. Wouldn't get too involved in that.
and also like you said, it's not our role to tell people like, you know, what kind of business they should get into, but it's also something that should match their business acumen and make sure that, you know, they can actually take this project to like a successful company level. So yeah.
And so Carol asked about the F1 OPT recommending for E2. I think that John kind of covered that, but John, do you want to mention anything else? You know, do you recommend it?
Yeah, just whenever we will start early, and whenever see it's strong enough to file, we file with enough time. So if it's denied, they have their I-20, it's valid, and they can go back to school and stay here. That's the one main thing. And hopefully premium processing is there right now, it's shut down to give an answer faster.
Yeah. Okay. Has anyone ever filed for a Haranka waiver? I'm pronouncing things all wrong today.
No, right.
If so, what ground of inadmissibility, and was it successful?
No, Haranka's here. I've rarely found someone who's done it, even though I'm sure it happens a lot.
Yeah. I don't know.
What's your position now with real estate and enterprise investments? Do you still find those doable? At what scale, in what amount, the number of properties, and what type of structuring?
I'm hesitant on doing it. I've heard people do it because I get calls for this, people who want to do, flip-flop kind of buying and fixing stuff. And in California, it's so expensive. I don't think it's realistic. So I'm like, if you're going to do it in an area that's less expensive property-wise and remodeling, maybe. But yeah, people in Los Angeles, you know, a garbage property is $500,000. So I don't really want just one property. I want them to own 2 or 3 that they could flip and turn around if they could do something like that, which is just my personal opinion. But there's risks involved with property, but I hear people do it though.
Yeah.
Are you seeing consulates trying to implement the Buy American, Hire American policy on an E2 interview? I would say it depends on the consulate.
For L's, yeah, but yeah.
I think it shows a good faith effort that you're also going to comply with, you know, the idea of an E2. So I would definitely say that I think it makes a positive impact when you hire Americans, and that you show that you're going to hire Americans, and also that your model, you know, will foster hiring Americans, because if you're like a big like French, company and you want to just hire a bunch of French people, then it's going to be harder to push that whole Buy American, Hire American.
Okay, procedurally, if 2 investors 50-50, do you file 1 application?
Depends on if they want to come together or not. If they want to come at the same time, yes. And I actually, I'm preparing one right now. And sometimes they want to come, you know, at different times, and then you get one first, and later on you apply for the next one.
Yeah, it's sometimes if you have weak cases, like one who's strong, one who's weak, like send the first one who's strong like first, and then the weak one later, so they don't get denied both at the same time if the weak one doesn't make a good impression.
What's your experience with getting interviews for renewals for visas that are expiring soon, given the closures?
Right now.
Thing we can do at the moment, you know, like the embassies are not processing cases, so if their I-94 is expiring, just extend their status with USCIS. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, we are 10 minutes over. Trying to see. We have so many great questions, and I know that I personally am available to talk to people about. You know, you can friend me on Facebook if you want. Brittany Thomas Faith. I know Sarah is an excellent resource, and John and Estelle are great. And I mean, I think that we're all available for follow-up questions if you have them. Anything else, guys?
I think we're good. I mean, if we want to stop the webinar, we can, and we can. I can stay on. I see that we still have over 60 participants, so I can stay on to answer questions if that's necessary.
One note I did want to make is the importance of understanding the strategy of having a 5-year visa and I-90 being 2 years, and going back forth, coming in and getting more than 5 years, so you could push. That's something not everyone understands. I'm not sure if I explained it well enough, but there is a strategy of playing that game if you have a 5-year visa to keep it going.
Well, basically any visa, when you come in, you get usually 2 years. So even if you have a 3 months visa, you come in and then boom, you get 2 years.
As long as your passport is valid for 2 years at the time of entry.
Yeah, so that's I mean, it's a great strategy to be able to ramp up and show that you're a good business for an E2.
I had a couple quick ones. With regards to E2s, you know, just if someone's a dual national, they could use the other country as well. Keep in mind, if they have a 5-year visa, it doesn't mean the embassies nowadays will give the full 5 years. London has been giving 1 or 2 years just to test it out. So don't think it's guaranteed they get the full time nowadays. They've gone stricter on that.
Yeah, and not just London, it happens everywhere.
Yeah. When I do the consultation, I tell them, for example, you can have up to 25 months, up to 5 years, but it's not guaranteed 5 years. And it's not because you got, for example, 2 years the first time around, that at the time of the renewal, you're stuck to 2 years. You can get up to the maximum for your country. So it can be up to 5 years at the time of the renewal.
Yeah.
Also on that visa reciprocity, check the fees, not just the length of time. There have been massive increases in visa reciprocity fees, especially for like Australia. It's going to cost us maybe like $10,000.
Yeah.
You don't want them to be surprised all of a sudden get hit with the bill extra $10,000.
So if someone is on F1 OPT, do you so we've already answered that one. And do you see not paying yourself from the business as an issue coming on renewal?
If the company makes profit, no. You don't need to receive a salary. You can receive either salary by itself or only, or profits, or the combination of the two, and that's usually sufficient.
Yeah, I mean, the profit is remuneration. I think it's more in terms of remuneration. I would be more worried about after 5 years, for instance, someone who's never did a draw like that. That would be.
But then you can explain that and play with the fact that maybe the investor left the profit into the company to be able to reinvest, purchase more equipment, and things like that. So try to talk a lot with your client to know what happened during the validity period of the visa, to understand and also how did they live. You know, like it's very important.
There's a public charge component of that too. How did you show your personal bank account that's money, pay rent and stuff?
Yeah.
If a client is going to consular process for renewal, do you implement any sort of winding down in the business in case the visa is refused, or how would you suggest to do this?
I mean, I don't. I mean, the idea is like that, you know, you're going to be renewed. I mean, if you're winding down, I would be worried that you're actually putting a lot of negative energy and, you know, not using all your energy into actually getting the visa. And I think you kind of feel it if it's not going to be renewed, but it's also pretty rare. It doesn't happen.
Any tips on E2 renewal from Ecuador, who's no longer a treaty country? They had a E2 before and now they have to renew.
They sent out a breakdown of how it's going to work. If you already had one, you can maybe renew it once within a certain period of time, but it's going to wind down. There was a breakdown of how they're going to process this based on that treaty.
Mm-hmm. We had one question that I typed an answer to. Okay, because of the so if someone is has purchased a business, there's an extension, like the embassies are closed, and how long is it going to be passed? And then, you know, what strategies do you have for getting to an interview now? I mean, my understanding is if the consulates are closed, the consulates are closed, and I don't think an E2, I mean, you maybe can make an excuse, an argument that it's an emergency, but I think E2s are generally, if the consulates aren't processing, they're not going to have an interview.
I was reading on a listserv today that there's some European countries are putting like July dates and maybe late June for visa appointments. So some stuff are starting for non-immigrant visas, but if they're from Europe, there's a travel ban from Europe, which is actually doesn't affect non-immigrant visa waivers, but there's a 2-week travel ban for European Schengen countries. With regards to, you know, the time between starting and not, I don't think it's a big deal. It's just, it's not just sitting there and it will be operational once you're in the United States. I think that's what's important. As long as things don't decay or you know, things go to hell in a handbasket in the meantime.
And you know, some embassies, they didn't, like they closed, but you still have access to their calendar to be able to schedule interviews. And basically they've been canceling interviews lately and without sending any emails. So the client go back to the portal where they schedule the interview and they realize that they have no more interviews. So tell your clients to go pretty frequently on the platform where they schedule the interview, US Visa Info or something like that come, and to check if their interviews are still on. For example, for Paris now, the first interview is at the end of July, and I had a lot of appointments scheduled by the end of May until the mid-June that got canceled without any notification.
And I would say if you haven't already filed with the consulate, do everything you need to file and get it so it's on their doorstep, especially if they're a consulate that allows for electronic filing of all the documents. And then as soon as they are scheduling interviews, your client's in line.
Yeah.
I say we're the first to get back on the horse. Like you're prepared for that. Yeah.
All right, and then one last question: is it better to renew in the United States? And I don't know if that's because of COVID. It's the question doesn't answer that, but because of COVID or just in general.
One thing someone told me I want to mention earlier is, when you deal with USCIS, their primary worry is about fraud. And if you're dealing with the embassy, their primary worry is about, is this economically advantageous? So it really depends on the business. If it's making money and stuff, maybe the embassy's better if it were open and stuff because you get a longer visa period. But renewal here, maybe if you're not, you need to stay here for COVID or like there's other factors involved. It's really such a case-by-case basis kind of thing. But right now, COVID-19, if you leave and you can't come back in, you're pretty much forced to renewal. It's only 2 years, and if you leave, if your visa's invalid, you have to get a new visa to start the whole process again.
You may not have the choice right now, but to extend in the U.S.
Yeah. Is that the question? If you can't extend in the U.S.?
No, they just said, is it better? It was a simple question. Was just is it better to renew in the United States? It didn't have details. So. All right, well, I think we're 20 minutes over. I think we've had a information-packed webinar. I think there's probably thousands of questions we could answer, and there's probably no one I would trust more to answer these questions than you people. But I think it's time to end this party. So.
Yeah, connect with us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on all these kind of stuff. We're all there to keep the communication going.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much to all the participants. We're till 50, so thank you for being so generous with your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Take care.